All right, welcome. Today I want to talk about soul. I want to kind of explain what I mean when I say soul, what it's like to live ensouled, and how soul connects to suffering, darkness, and how when we live ensouled, actually we transform suffering from something to avoid to something to sink our teeth into. And over time, there is a really radical shift that happens in the way that we relate to pain, suffering, darkness when we are living ensouled and we have that lens to view life through. So, first, soul. What do I mean when I say that? When I'm referring to soul, it's not in any sort of dogmatic, fundamentalist, religious kind of framework. It's about the deepest parts of ourselves. And as I've said many times, from the lens of emptiness. In traditional Buddhism, they say there is no soul. And yes, at, the deepest level, there's no soul, no separation, no self, other world. It all blends and merges into one. I mean, that's all I'll say about it for now. But so with emptiness, we recognize that there is no separate self, there is no ego. It never existed in the first place. It was just smoke and mirrors. So then what we are is, the way I see it, is a creative expression directly from source, or the art project of God, if you want to call it that. And God's spirit, source, is trying to experience itself through us, through motifs and vignettes of our lives. And in a sense, again, the Hindus talk about the divine play, the Lila, Lila, I think. That's how it's spelled. And this is the divine play that we are partaking in, where we are both the actors and the audience simultaneously. And so it's everything else, everyone else. So when we hold this view of self, experience, perception being an artistic expression of source divinity, then we're free to start viewing experience through that lens. Instead of being something personal, something solid, contracted in the solid sense of self, solid worldviews, it becomes much more fluid, where this is a stage where we are performing, consciously or unconsciously, and creating scenes that, again, creation wants to experience. So this has a this is very pragmatic in the sense that it changes how we relate to something like suffering. Where suffering at first, in the hedonistic culture that, I grew up in the West, when there is pain, suffering, we're taught to view it as if something is objectively wrong with us. Oh, I'm depressed. Something's clearly wrong with me. I'm sad for a long time. I can't connect with others. I feel lonely. This kind of suffering, when we feel it in our culture, we have this innate unconscious response to say something is wrong with me. And that's, I don't want to completely get rid of that view. Sure, you could say something's wrong with you and make that your lived experience. But I think that it would be a tragedy to have only that view, that there's something wrong with me. We can have a multi-dimensional experience of what's going on when we're experiencing suffering, where it's not just something's wrong. I'm trying to live a part, a role. Creation, source, God is trying to live through me, is trying to taste a certain flavor of experience through this pain, through this depression, through this loneliness. When I see my suffering through that lens, through the lens of the archetypal, the imaginal, the poetic, then that experience of suffering is not something to avoid in the same way. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. It doesn't mean I'm fucking up my life. It's more of, again, it's a stage. It's a role that I'm being asked to fulfill. So really, a deep flavor of healing comes from opening to maybe the darker flavors of experience, opening to the role that creation is asking me to play, whether that's depressed, anxious, lonely. Um, just, again, something very poetic, almost like Shakespearean in the suffering, seeing it as beautiful tragedy, grief as a beautiful expression of love, actually. And we push these experiences away, often unconsciously, because they're different. We like the high, we don't like the low. But interestingly, if we can open ourselves to both the high and the low, then we'll find that there's nothing to run from. There's absolutely deep beauty, deep resonance in the darker flavors of experience. We just are so busy pushing them away and resisting them that we turn them into something that is so unpleasant. We make it unpleasant, deeply unpleasant at least. There's going to be, pain in life. But in the words of Shinzen Young and other Buddhist teachers like Andrew Holacek, our experience of suffering is equivalent to our experience of pain multiplied by our resistance to that pain. So if we experience depression, loneliness, whatever, and we resist that discomfort, we're actually amplifying it in our subjective experience. So if we lower our resistance to something like depression or loneliness, heartbreak, whatever, grief, when we lower our resistance, the subjective experience of suffering associated with that experience also decreases. And I'm telling you, this is how it works. Try it out for yourself. I don't need to preach it. Try it out. You will see that suffering does equal pain multiplied by our resistance to that pain. And when we understand this mechanism of how actually we construct experiences of suffering, then we start to get a lot more control over our experience. When I'm suffering, asking the question, how am I adding to this suffering? Maybe just first asking, am I adding to this suffering? And following that line of inquiry to be how? How am I relating to this experience? Is this heartbreak completely unacceptable in my experience? And what happens if I can again view it through the poetic lens, the imaginal archetypal lens, opening to that heartbreak, letting this character right here fulfill that role of being heartbroken, sobbing, weeping, being really blue. That's maybe a flavor that soul wants to experience. So bringing this back to, again, soul. And again, in the words of James Hillman, if there isn't a tinge of sadness, then the soul doesn't really want it. The soul craves that darkness, that melancholic, that painful, that richness, that fertility that comes from those places, the depths of soul, the depths of our being, the things we don't want to look at, the darkness, that which has not been illuminated with the light of awareness, all that scary stuff. That is that dark, fertile soil that actually nourishes soul. It nourishes beauty in our experience. It nourishes meaningfulness. When I work really hard for something, when I've experienced a lot of pain, it adds dimensionality to my experience. And the soul knows that. Maybe we don't consciously all the time, but the deepest parts of our being already know that. And they're going to go into that underworld whether we want them to or not. And that's by design. And can we let them? Can we let soul go to those dark places without saying, oh, there's something inherently wrong with me? This pathologizing culture in psychology and in the medical system, it brainwashes us to think there's something inherently personally wrong with me. If I'm depressed, if I'm anxious, if I'm, having a dark night of the soul. Again, the dark night of the soul is what the soul wants, potentially. And so I like this metaphor that I use for darkness and soul, which is soul is diving into the depths of being, into the darkness, into the rich, fertile soil of being. And we scoop up that soil that fertility, and it nourishes our whole being. So the soul, like, in a sense, I imagine it as like a bird flying into the darker depths, and it scoops some up and it takes it with it back into the light, and that darkness nourishes the being. But sometimes, as you could probably guess, when we dive into those dark depths, consciously or unconsciously, we can get stuck in that muck. And that is where something like clinical psychotherapy can be really helpful. Clinical psychotherapy, ceremonial work, shamanistic work, trance states, community, others to help you get out of that muck again. Because although the soul craves it, sometimes we do get stuck there and we need help. And yeah, I really like that metaphor, that image, that poetic lens on the value of darkness. And again, the deeper we dive, and maybe we get stuck for a while, we're taking a real big scoop of that darkness. And when you get out of it and get your head metaphorically above water, above the muck again, it nourishes you so deeply to have that relative experience of darkness, light, immense darkness. You peep your head up, and wow, it's bright up here. This is nice. And that relative experience is necessary, actually. Nav, what would the sun be without the rain? Day without night, high without low tide. The relativity is what gives things meaning. So, to live ensouled, to live with soul. I guess in order to really explore what it means to live ensouled, we have to explore what it's like to live without soul. And that is, I think, a big part of the mental health crisis today. As far as personal meaning crises, existential nihilism, meaninglessness, this flat, meaningless existence that we've been conditioned to believe. Again, that's a story, an empty story. For instance, materialism, scientism, reductionism. I've talked about this in other videos, but reductionism reduces reality to a narrow mold. Scientism says only what is provable by science is what's real. Everything else, not real. Materialism says only matter, only material things are real. The imagination isn't. But the imagination creates our lived experience. Our stories, our narratives, our imagined sense of self and imagined sense of world creates what we are walking through. You cannot separate reality from imagination. It's non-dual in a sense. They're the same. They blend and merge. There is, in a sense, you could say, an arbitrary delineation between imagination and reality. So, but again, reductionism, scientism, materialism are the worldviews, are some of the worldviews that we operate from. Postmodern kind of ways of thinking where there is no ultimate truth also is one of those views. It would be cool to actually have a video about all of these conceptual frameworks, really, that we live in and don't really understand that we live in them, for a later date. So to live ensouled and bring it back to what it's like to live without soul, and to recognize that our experience is conditioned by these views. Again, reductionism, materialism, scientism. Our experience is conditioned by those narratives, so that is the world that we experience, where, according to science and materialism, it's just lifeless, chaotic, random matter bouncing off each other in the universe, and somehow I randomly ended up here, and it's just this consciousness in kind of a meaningless world, and all religion is just, we've evolved beyond religion, so science is what's really real. But when we hold that view, you can feel it in your soul, in your system. It feels like, ooh, it's pretty lonely out here. I'm pretty desolate, pretty flat. There's no opportunity for depth, for meaning, for real depth, to touch the deepest parts of the being. I won't say no opportunity, but there's a limited opportunity. I think like romantic love is one of the most popular ways that people in our culture today find that depth and meaning. But it's not the only path to immense meaningfulness and depth. Again, the senses of the sacred, senses of the divine. We have lost touch with that in exchange for the flat, materialistic lens, which again is not the enemy necessarily. It's just if we only have access to that one view, the one worldview of materialism, scientism, then we're limiting ourselves, we're limiting the mind, we're limiting the psyche and perception to be able to dive into more rich, deeply meaningful experiences. So having the ability to move between different ways of seeing ourselves and the world, different dimensions to it, different depths, where we can say, yes, science is real at one level, and also this world is completely immaterial. But also we can say, yeah, material is real at one level. Do we have access to those different levels, or are we stuck on one? Are we stuck on one plane? Again, the lack of depth, the lack of the ability to go into different depths, into different ways of seeing self-world narrative, leaves us in this flat place. And actually, I listened to this talk by Rob Berbea, again, best spiritual teacher that I've found to date, easily, no contest. Anyway, so he was saying this flat existence, this flat worldview that we inhabit, that again is just rooted in limited, solidified narratives about what we are and what the world is. That flat land that kind of evokes leads to greed. It leads to this inequality in material wealth because we're all searching for more. The eros, the deepest parts of our being, desires more. That's not wrong inherently. It's just where we focus that desire is where there can be real issues. If we focus it only on more materially in this flat sense, I just need more, sexual experiences, more, diverse vacations, shows, more friends. I need more money, more security, more boats, whatever it is. It's flat. And anyone who has a lot of money, anyone can tell you that really the money can't get you what your soul most deeply wants, because that is not in this flat place. Yes, it's not like, go get all the things, but just recognize that there are limitations to how that is going to improve the quality of your experience. What about depth? Again, beyond the horizontal, there is the vertical plane, and soul wants that. So we can, again, move through the vertical plane. We can focus our eros, our desire, the desires of our soul, not just on the vertical or on the horizontal plane, on more and more things, experiences, whatever, but on more depth, on more connection to divinity, on more connection to the roots of our soul. In that vertical dimension, we'll find that soul is nourished deeply, where we can find what we have been looking for. And I don't know about you, but an image that pops in my head with this is like being in a barren wasteland and you're just looking for water and no one has any. It's like, where's the water? Where's the depth? Where's the meaning? Where's the connection to source? Where's something that nourishes my soul? Where is that? Someone please show me. And looking back on my life, that is really a big part of my whole spiritual journey. Is less about freedom, more about where can I nourish my soul, my being, from the waters of the infinite, the waters of the rich, the meaningful, the poetic. So, again, what's it like to live without soul? Painful, confusing, separated, isolated, malnourished at the level of soul, the deepest parts of our being. And if you watch my videos, maybe you have tasted that experience of malnourishment. And you, like me, have been looking, where can I feed the soul? Where can I drink the water of the divine. And that's where we start to explore the vertical dimension of existence, of being, of relationship to self, other world, understanding the role that the mind plays in the construction of deep, meaningful experiences, experiences that touch the soul. The most important moments of your life, you could say, are those moments of deep meaningfulness, profundity, divinity, sacredness, whether it's with a lover, with a friend, with nature, pushing your body physically, mentally, emotionally, a near-death experience, potent moments. Those experiences of meaningfulness and profundity are actually co-creations. We have a role to play in that experience, in the narratives, the conceptual frameworks. The soul has a role to play in how, when, why we experience those things. So, again, just the life without soul is a big part of the mental health crisis. And again, when I say soul, I mean the deepest parts of our being, that which resonates deeply, senses meaningfulness, profundity, depth, depth, generally speaking. So to live ensouled is to start to wake up the sensors in our body, the phalanges that pick up experiences of soulfulness. This is a felt sense. This can be a conceptual framework in the mind. It's probably a combination of both. Our conceptual framework, for instance, if I feed the view that this is a heavenly realm, this is immaterial in the way that we've been conditioned to believe that it is, and everything that we see, every word out of my mouth, every way I move my body, every fluttering of the aspen leaves is actually an expression of theophany, an expression of the sacred, of the divine. Everything. And how does that affect the being? How do you feel that when you inhabit that conceptual framework? How do you feel that? I mean, for me, I just got chills, and there's like a warmth on my body also, and a lightness, and a sense of deep knowing. So that's a certain conceptual framework that we can feed and nourish, and that conceptual framework will lead to different ways that the soul senses experiences, senses the movement of the aspen leaves, it senses the sound of my own voice. Who is speaking? Beyond senses of separate self, beyond solidification of narratives. Who is speaking? And we can let that sink into the being. And this is, again, just one example, a guided exploration into soul. Understanding emptiness takes us right there to a direct experience of the sacred, the divine, the ineffable, source of all things. And that's right here now. So, living ensouled, it's in a sense a muscle. The more we flex that soul muscle, stronger it gets, bigger it gets. Sort of like mindfulness too. The more we practice mindfulness, the stronger that mindfulness muscle gets. And obviously, mindfulness and sensing the soul are a great tag team of, psychic muscles. Because mindfulness, you get to notice, how am I seeing things right now? And then with the soul muscle, you get to choose a way of seeing that is ensouled, brings depth and meaning. It's not like you have to live like that all the time. I don't think it's possible. I mean, right now, again, it's a muscle, so it'll get bigger the more that we use it. Just recognizing, how am I seeing things? Is it in that flat, meaningless plane of existence? And can I change my narrative, my conceptual framework, my desires, to be able to tap into deeper experiences of depth? Again, sensing self, sensing the world, sensing experiences, sensing other people through the lens of soul. And that can mean seeing others as, again, angels in an immaterial world, just like we are. angels, ghosts, actors of the divine play. Yeah, a lot of us just don't realize that. I mean, that's one lens to hold, that we're all maybe unconsciously acting as actors for the sacred, to view and experience and act in this play of existence. So again, the value of being ensouled, it's not only, well, it's not only the senses of meaningfulness and profundity. I mean, that's huge, obviously, but it's how an ensouled experiencer, how living through the lens of soul affects suffering. How living through the lens of soul affects how we relate to darkness, how we relate to pain, how we relate to trauma. Is it only trauma in the sense of I'm a victim? Or can we view this trauma as a gift in an immaterial place where there are no random acts, there is no randomness, there's no coincidences? Can we hold a view that there is a divine order here beyond what we can comprehend with the limitations of the human mind right now? Can we trust that? Can we trust that plan for us, recognizing that pain builds us? Pain and suffering and darkness, it not just adds dimensions to life, but it chisels us into something new. It chisels us into something that we could not be without it, actually. That heartbreak, that trauma from the past, the fact that I didn't get the childhood I wish I did. At first, that can hurt, and that's supposed to hurt. But over time, that pain gets turned into a gift and a blessing if we let it, if we learn how to relate to it and open to the blessing of pain, the blessing of suffering. And again, when we open to our suffering, the resistance goes down, and so too does the suffering. And yes, it's tough, but it's not, exponentially unmanageable tough. So when we live ensouled and can relate through the lens of soul to our suffering, see it as necessary for my growth, a gift from creation, and honor that, it will change our experience of what that pain, suffering is fundamentally. Because our experience of darkness does not exist independently of our own minds viewing, interpreting, and relating to that darkness. So when we flavor dark experiences as something objectively wrong, that flavors what we experience at the level of our perception. And if we can create a relationship of openness towards that darkness, of sensing the beauty in it, maybe the sense of the rightness in it, although maybe it's not pleasant in the hedonistic sense, maybe it feels right. If we can open to that, it will change what we see, what we feel. So we're at like 30 minutes. This was a video on soul, living ensouled, and the effect that living ensouled has on experience and specifically suffering. So if you have questions, let me know. If you want to get in touch with me directly, you can follow me on Instagram. It's DuffDaddy100, DuffDaddy100. I'm on that more than I'm on YouTube. But I don't know, maybe you can find a way to email me also. So thank you for watching.